you guys just released this report not too long ago, the State of Texas Women. What did you find?
Brooke?
Well, we found a lot. As a preface, our 2018, or I guess we call it our 2019 State of Texas Women, was capturing how many women were running and winning elected office in Texas during a presidential election, during a midterm election.
Right.
This time we're looking at a presidential election, so we're looking at something a little bit different. Some of the main points that we found were that only 9 counties out of 254 counties in Texas are actually at parity, which means that 50% of the seats are actually held by women. We noticed that for every one woman who ran for office, there were 3.5 men running for office. We noticed out of the 2,004 available seats during the 2020 election cycle, only 384 of them were filled by women. I know Adriana has a couple of more stats that distinguish Democratic women from Republican women and also distinguishes the difference between a presidential midterm election. One of the number one things that we captured and noticed is that 2018 is starting to look a lot like 1992, which you guys are like, what does that even mean? Why do I care? In 1992, that was the first coined Year of the Woman, which means we saw the most women ever running for political office across the country. It also happened to be during the time that First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton was serving in that position. Now, 2018, we saw another huge spike of women running for office, but after the 2020 election results, we're starting to see a stagnation, just like we did after 1992.
I want to ask you a little bit about the counties. You mentioned the counties where we're seeing parity in Texas, and there are not many of them. Dallas County, though, and Travis County, where Austin is, both of those were much more representative with, 50% of offices being held by women. Were you surprised that we're not seeing more parity in some of the larger metropolitan areas like a Harris County, a Bexar County, a Tarrant County?
So one thing that Brooke brought up that I wanted to reiterate is that there is a difference between the 2021 report that focuses on presidential elections versus the midterm. And in Texas, the midterm elections actually has more local offices that are on the ballot. And so if you look back to our first report, that shows that there were more counties that were at parity, whereas this year there weren't nearly as many. The one other thing I will note on that is different types of positions. So during the midterm elections, you have offices like district clerk and county treasurer up for the most part in every county. During the presidential, you have positions like sheriff, which are typically male dominated. And so you have those kind of differences that are important to note. To your question of if it's surprising, I think working in this field, you're not really surprised by how slow things move in the direction of parity. And so it's not quite surprising. It's disheartening to say more of the emotion that comes from it. But also, it gives us a little fire behind to keep doing what we're doing.
Brooke, what are these 9 counties?
We have the list in our State of the Texas Woman. Adriana, do you know them off the top
I'm
of your
asking
head?
you just, I'm asking you cold here.
You know what? We've got a lot of stats going and running at the same time. While Adriana's pulling it up, though, I also wanted to note that we saw a difference in Democratic and Republican women, which was really interesting. We noticed that grand overall takeaway in terms of Democratic versus Republican women are actually going to be more likely to win their race. And I know Adriana has more points on that. Adriana, do you have the 9 counties?
Well, I do.
Tell us the 9 counties, Adriana, but also why would Republican women have a better shot at winning their races than Democratic women?
Right. So, and I know we're getting into a lot of numbers, and as you ask the questions, we have more and more numbers to throw at you. So if there's ever too many, let us know. So the 9 counties in 2020 were Armstrong, Lynn, Sherman, Dallas, Glasscock, Kennedy, McCulloch, Randall, and Travis. And that looked quite a bit different from 2018. One reason, again, because of all the differences we talked about, but there was higher parity among the top 10 counties in 2018 than there was in 2020. So the top county in 2020 had 60%, which was 3 of them, Armstrong, Lynn, and Sherman, whereas the top 3 counties in 2018 started at 81.8%, which is far above parity. And that was Cass. And then you have Freestone and Irion following with 80% and 75%.
Which is surprising to Jason's point, too, that it's some of these rural. I've never heard of Armstrong, Lynn, or Randall counties. I'm surprised that more of the metropolitan areas,
Yeah,
like Jason
and
said,
so
are not listed.
That's one of the things that is important with looking at this from a geographical viewpoint, which is all of what my background is in. It ends up showing these interesting trends that you might not have seen of just looking at the numbers. And so the next question to ask is, why are we seeing this in more rural counties? To bring up the point of why are Republican women winning at a higher success rate, the number is something like Republican women running win 60% of the time, whereas Democratic women running are winning about 40% of the time. That's a massive gap between those two. And one thing Brooke and I were talking about earlier was the aspect of there are 254 counties in Texas. We have under 20 of those that are in Democratic control. And so sheerly by the numbers of having 230 some odd counties, with each one having upwards of a dozen elected officials, you start multiplying those numbers and you have a lot more access to Republican women. So both of those things going on might be why some of those rural places are seeing more women. But we also do have to look into maybe there's something going on in those counties that isn't explained otherwise. And so we at least have somewhere to start looking rather than this being like a blank slate that nobody knew the answer to before.
Yeah, when I look at your report, I look at the top line of it there, and it looks like what's going on with Texans when they're walking into the voting booth. Why aren't they electing women? But then, when you talk about that stat that for every woman who runs in Texas, you have 3+ men who are running, you got to recruit more female candidates. How do you do that? How do we do that in this state?
I think there are a handful of solutions. So first and foremost, we know that women do run at a decreased rate compared to men, but it's not necessarily the only barrier that women are going to face. So we know that women can sometimes be asked upwards of 7 times to run for office before they actually choose to run for office. That's an incredible statistic, because if you ask a candidate who's a man, if they have been asked even more than once, they might come to you and say, I've never been asked. I just thought that would be a good opportunity. So we, as women who plan to run for office, need to lean on the circle of women who have already run for office. We need to tap into the candidate training. We need to tap into organizations that are trying to fill the gaps in the grassroots movements to help more women run for office. There's something that we found in our State of the Texas Woman that kind of speaks to this point. When we asked the people that we interviewed, and we have interviewed upwards of 150 women, when we ask them what their biggest piece of advice is for younger women interested in getting in politics, whether it's running for office or just being an activist, whatever position they want to take, their number one piece of advice is to just do it. And so as we start to see more of this advice trickling down into other young women who are about to rise up into the generation of people who are going to be running for office, hopefully we'll start to see that a combination of trainings and a combination of the women who came before them, lifting them up, adding more seats to the table versus fighting for that same seat at the table, is really where we're going to start to see more women running for office, and in turn, more women winning office.
Just to bring in what Brooke is saying contextually, and then with the numbers that we're finding. So one of the blaring attributes was that nearly half of counties didn't even have a woman run in a primary. And so like something behind that we're thinking is either women are incumbents, which we know they only make up about 25% of already elected officials, that they don't have challengers, or that they're just not entering when they see someone from their own party already has like signed up, or that they're, that they've already announced that they're running. So just even starting at like the point of filing for election, we need to see more women going in.
So that kind of leads to my next question. You said just do it, Brooke, just a moment ago, but as you noted, it takes money and it takes organization to actually run for office, to, whatever the office is going to be, especially the larger the office, the more you need of both. Have you guys seen any information or any data about whether women are getting access to both money and organization like men are?
It's pretty common knowledge that like around the political sphere that women are underfunded compared to men. But again, all of these stats come at like the congressional level or statewide level. And so it's hard to say that that is the exact same trend that's going on at the local level. I would make the argument that at the local level, there is a much smaller barrier for like monetary funds. And it's more so about getting that community support and just the will to want to do it yourself. And so that's where really empowering the individual, and then to reach out for those monetary funds and then to get the donors. It obviously affects women across the board, but it makes it that much more important to start locally, to get into those smaller elections, to have that form of government, that you're already running in, and then to build yourself up to the higher level.
But, even if a woman can get the money, even if she can get the donations and she decides to run, she's going to face a different race in a lot of cases than perhaps a male opponent is going to face. You all made the point in your report saying that research still indicates that women face greater scrutiny from the media, especially for topics, even here in 2021, especially for topics including family life and clothing. We're still on that? Brooke, you've run for local office. You can probably speak to this personally.
I can. In fact, my actual personal experience inspired me to seek a senior honors thesis when I was in college during my undergraduate years, which actually uncovered this media scrutiny, which plays a big part into what we do with Lone Star Parity Project. So when I ran for office, I faced a huge amount of scrutiny because of my identity as a Latina, because I was young, I was only 18 at the time, and because I didn't own my own home yet in city limits, which you would think that, that wouldn't disqualify me from understanding anything about the policy, from having parents that lived in the community that pay taxes. But I was scrutinized at every level, whereas my male counterparts who are also running were not scrutinized at all. So it inspired me in my undergraduate education to seek a senior honors thesis discussing the differences between men and women running for office at the state level and at the local level. I noticed in terms of media and in terms of research that's conducted that women are either always in the media when they're running for office or they're never in the media. So if you have a woman versus woman campaign, you will actually see less media scrutiny than if you were to see a woman versus man campaign. Now, there are obviously standout campaigns, for example, like the Texas Congressional District 24 race that happened in 2020. That was a standout campaign because that was a woman versus a woman, but there were a lot of other factors playing into why that had an extreme amount of media scrutiny. So women will either be over scrutinized for things about their personal life, like their lifestyle priorities, if they want to have family, if they plan to run and have family. When I personally ran, I was dealing with a medical issue at the time. I had some shoulder surgery, a very simple, basic surgery. And I had people asking me if I was going to survive to even live out long enough to serve my term as a young and healthy 18-year-old. That was something that was never asked of my counterparts, and definitely never asked of any of the candidates who were also running in other races who probably had more serious health conditions than I did. So that's just an example of how something that is seemingly negligible can become over scrutinized in the media or completely overlooked if I were to be running against another woman or running by myself, I wouldn't seem spectacular in what I was doing, even though if I were an 18-year-old young man running for that position, we would have seen that all over the news.
Brooke, let me ask you about the congressional race for District 24. That makes up kind of northern Dallas County and northern Tarrant County, and that was the race in last November. That was Beth Van Dyne versus Candace Valenzuela. Van Dyne won that race. It was widely seen as a Republican seat. But what happens if a Republican woman is running against a Democratic woman? Did you guys find, or maybe the question's for you, Adriana. Did you find any data on what happens, since Republican women normally win more than Democratic women?
To me, that ends up coming down to the demographics of the district itself. It's because we don't have like the data behind all these places. It's hard to make this general sweeping, like trend line of what's going on. And that's what's important about what we're doing, is that we are bringing the data to this because it doesn't exist outside of what we're doing. So yeah, to answer point blank, it's hard to say. You can't just take one data point and say something's going on there. To me, that district is just barely starting to become like a battleground and possibly turn blue. So it comes down to the partisan politics, I think, at that point.
I want to ask about the sort of the future here, because as we all know here, our politics has gotten more bare knuckled. It seems like it's a lot more harsh. The rhetoric is a lot more harsh than it used to be, it seems. And I wonder, is that going to benefit men even more going down the road? Because we've heard this time and time again, that it is harder for a woman. She has to walk this really fine line with her rhetoric compared to a man. Otherwise, she may be labeled as one thing or another. I mean, we've seen some very strong women, Ann Richards, one of two governors in this state's history. She was not shy about laying it all out there, and she did well. But is this going to be harder for women, because it seems like they have to walk a finer line with their rhetoric at a time when rhetoric is just, seems like it's getting nastier and nastier in politics?
I think that, and this is something that Adriana and I have discussed with one another, that it really takes not only women being empowered to run and to win and to serve in office without fear of retaliation from the community because they do something that a male counterpart wouldn't be judged for, but it also takes male allies to help in the political realm, help with issues that have been traditionally seen as women's issues. So I wholly disagree with the concept that there's such thing as a women's issue. There are issues that women have an incredibly important perspective on. Traditionally, women have been the only decision makers for concepts of education, reproductive health, although that is wholly related to a woman's body, funding for healthcare. A lot of these things are what has been considered societally as women's issues. But as we see, for example, with Congressman Colin Allred, he is currently fighting for family leave, which is something that has been traditionally a women's issue, but is now being seen as an issue across the board for everyone to have an important perspective on. And I think it's important for more folks, for example, like Colin Allred and like other men in decision-making positions, to start to be an ally for women, bringing them to the table on issues that are not traditionally considered women's issues, and also sending themselves to tables that are considered traditionally women's issues, and making sure that we have active representation on all of these issues so that women feel more empowered and have more doors open for them in terms of running for office and getting to those positions in the first place.
So you found that women make up a quarter of elected offices here in Texas, even though women are, half or more of the population in this state. I know that you all talked with people all the way down to the collegiate level. What do you see in the pipeline? Do you see more young women coming up through the pipeline than maybe we would have seen in years past, who are saying, yeah, just do it. I'm ready to jump in there and start serving?
So we do see more women in the pipeline, but again, it's something that we can't simply hold on to and say, yes, there's more women on the way. We're doing good. Let's keep working on it. But, it's on the back burner because it's on the way. we're starting to see, like I said, that same stagnant period right after a huge spike in women running for office. So 2018, those people who were in the pipeline burst. We saw so many women running for office, an incredible historic amount actually across the entire country, but definitely in Texas. And then we get to 2020 election, a presidential election, which you would think we would see, although like Adriana mentioned, there's a difference in the number of positions available to be run for. But we start to see that same stagnant number of representation, which is the overall number of how many people are serving. And that 20% number is actually only representative of statewide. There are actually only 19.2, I believe, percent of countywide positions held by women, which is even more dismal. It doesn't seem like a lot, but when we're talking about thousands of positions that are available for people to fill, that's a horrible number. That's upsetting. So we do see more women in the pipeline, but we have to keep nourishing that relationship that we have with the women in the pipeline. We can't get them excited to run for office, and then when they decide that maybe they are ready to run for office based on their own decision, they get there and there's no other woman in those positions to help lead, to pave the way for them, to give them advice, to kind of share their experiences. We have to keep that pipeline moving, and we have to keep feeding that pipeline to make sure that the people who are currently on the way, who are in those collegiate positions, are going to be excited and going to still be ready to run when they are at the point where they feel like they are qualified to run.
Adriana, you're the numbers person here. When do we reach parity in Texas?
We wish it would have already happened by now. There's tons of projections from many entities that are like, if we go at the rate that we are, it's going to take 200 years. This is the importance of staying engaged. We know that in Texas, we have a pretty low voter participation number. And so all of these things are congruent to each other of you have more activism in a state, you are going to have more people empowered, you're going to have more women empowered. And so we can't be complacent in this. We must continue, like Brooke was saying, to nourish the people who are already thinking about it, to bring more people into the pipeline, to have a more representative democracy at the end of the day. It works for all of us much better when more people are involved.
If we are able to reach parity here in Texas, how does government look different? How does it look different if 50% of elected officials here are women?
To your point earlier about the rhetoric, women are seen as being more agreeable and that we are better compromisers. And so, 50.1% might look like we have better governance. It might look like we have more bipartisanship. It's hard to say what it might look like because we've never experienced it in America. And so the possibilities are endless of what could happen. And that's not to say that we should just fall back on what already exists. It's to keep pushing forward and see the potential that we can live up to in our, governance at the local level, at the state level, for our nation.
I'm curious, have y'all gotten any lessons learned from any women who run for office who might have been unsuccessful? Brooke, I guess you fall into that spot, but any lessons learned that you might share with our listeners who someone might be considering maybe running it someday?
From a personal perspective, and also a lot from what I have seen personally interviewing people, but also looking at all the interviews as a whole, I think the biggest lesson learned is that running for office is a balancing act. And what the candidates put forward is going to be what they want you to see. But you have to understand that they are only human and that the candidate might look different from the policymaker. So we might see somebody who's really good at networking, who has a great personality in the community, who has lived there for a long time, knows a lot about what's going on, but their policy perspective might be very different from what people are looking for, or they might not be a great policymaker, but a fantastic candidate. In my personal experience, I also had to learn that running for office is a very tough experience. And I think you really have to jump in with a group of people that you can depend on and lean on. A lot of the women that we interview who are candidates or who have been candidates and who haven't won have talked about how the public scrutiny was sometimes unbearable. The balancing of having to run for office and have a full-time job or any other lifestyle priorities that they may have was very difficult to do and to keep under wraps. But I think if we all start to recognize that a candidate and a policymaker are two different positions, and that being a candidate is one of the most difficult things someone can go through in life, then we can all start to be more honest and transparent when we're running for office, and hopefully a little less judgmental of the people that we are seeing as candidates and more judgmental of them as policymakers.
Brooke, I think that Jason and I got tangled there in our last question. He was asking, do you think that you might run for office again after you've been through it once and you've learned some things? Do you think you'd do it again?
Well, first step for me is actually graduating law school. I graduate law school in a couple of weeks. So first step for me is graduating, taking the bar, finding a job, and then seeing where I land. But I definitely don't see that it's out of the question.
That sounds like a politician. they never rule it out, but they don't rule it in either. So, yeah.
So she could run for office again.
It's in the cards. I could. I won't say no, but I don't have any firm plans at this time to run.
Well, thank you both for doing this with us here. I mean, it's enlightening when we see the numbers that you all have put together. I would imagine that you're gearing up now for 2022, and who knows, maybe we'll see something entirely different then after we've seen these wild swings these past couple of reports. But thanks for doing this. It really does shed a light in an important area, I think.
Thank you.